Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hi-Fi Preschool and Kids Weekly Training Podcast. You know what? We are so glad that you are joining us. Whatever you're doing right now, maybe you're driving in the car, maybe you're having some lunch, maybe you're doing some chores. That's actually my favorite time to listen to podcasts. But we are so glad that you are all joining us. And joining me today, I have Kayla and I have Rachel, part of our Hi-Fi team. Well, today we are continuing the truth of God knows me and I am known. And as we look at this week 4, we are going to see how God knows my real fears. God knows my real fears. Those things that maybe keep us up at night, the things that maybe give us a little apprehension. He knows those fears. And we are going to be able to show kids and preschoolers, what do we do with those fears? Because as kids, as preschoolers, we can have a lot of fears. So before we jump into all the content, I would love to hear from you, Kayla and Rachel. What is something that you were afraid of when you were a kid, and now looking back as an adult, you're like, that's a little bit ridiculous?
Ooh, that's a fun question. I would say for me, I was very afraid of the kids' movies that I watched that had like the scary stuff in them, like flying monkeys or scary like octopus queens. Like they were just things I watched. And I was like, oh no, that's so scary. Because I also just like believed it as reality. And I couldn't, like, I was so young, I couldn't understand the difference. And so I remember like getting very emotional as a kid. And now I look back on some of those things and like the kinds of like CGI and animation, and I'm like, oh, that was silly.
Those flying monkeys looked real. They were great. That is a good one. That is a good one. Rachel, what about you?
Well, as Kayla was talking, it made me think about how when I used to watch The Muppet Christmas Carol, which is one of my favorite movies, Marley and Marley used to scare me to death when I was a kid. But I was also thinking that when I was younger, like going to Disney World and people in costumes, things like that used to really make me uncomfortable and scared. I don't know, honestly, what I thought was happening with them, if they were real or not real. But I just was not comfortable meeting them, hugging them, doing all the other things that kids did at Disney and at theme parks and stuff. But now I understand, oh, it's okay. They're people.
That is those are both really good. Those are good fears to have as kids. Like, I understand both of those fears for sure. Well, as we talk to kids and preschoolers about their fears and what they should do, we are going to be looking at the story of Peter walking on water and how when he went out, he was feeling afraid. So, Rachel, I want to ask you, what's the biggest takeaway for preschoolers and for kids from the story of Peter walking on water, and how does that connect to how God knows our real fears?
Yeah, great question. So I think this is a really neat story to tell to kids and preschoolers, especially preschoolers, because we're not focusing on what was scary or what was the fearful part so much as we're focusing on how Jesus was present in Peter's fear and he rescued Peter. But even more so, we see through this Bible story that the storm was raging. And when Jesus rescued Peter, the storm didn't immediately stop. The storm didn't stop until they were on the boat, and how Jesus being present and Jesus being there for Peter and offering his peace and his salvation didn't make the storm immediately stop. And that's the way it is in our lives. And that's the way it is in our preschoolers' lives and our kids' lives. This is something we experience no matter what age we're in. We have real fears. We have real storms and difficult circumstances that happen in our lives. And Jesus is with us and he can give us peace in those storms. But it does not mean that they're going to be stopped immediately. It doesn't mean that situations will be tied up with a happy bow always. Things happen that are very, very difficult. And Jesus gives us his peace And sometimes that peace is to continue weathering the storm, that he's with us even with the storm raging. It doesn't mean it disappears.
That's so true. I think being very cognizant of saying, hey, yes, you do have these fears and that the things around you may not change, but God can take care of you and your fear is so true, because there really are so many things that preschoolers and kids can be afraid of. So, Kayla, how can we as leaders help them take those fears, not hold them tight, but really take them to God?
Yeah. I love the action points in this story with Peter and Jesus, because with Peter's real fear, he was real confident at first, right? And then he got real fearful real quickly. Um, but it was when as you guys have all probably taught the story before, or at least read it, like the fear came when he took his eyes off Jesus. The fear came when he started looking around and looking at the waves and looking at the wind and, oh my gosh, am I actually walking on water? Like, that's what I would have thought if I were Peter. But it's when we take our eyes off of Jesus that those fears feel insurmountable. And I think with kids and preschoolers, it's helpful for us to remind them that every fear we have, as big as it feels, God is bigger. As much as we're scared, as much as we don't know what's going to happen, or the uncertainty or the uncomfortableness that comes with fear, God is bigger. He is stronger. He knows the fears that we have. He knows what's going on, and he is capable. He is strong. He is trustworthy. And so anchoring kids in the identity of God and who he is helps us understand and cope with the fears that we have. And like Rachel said, it's not that necessarily the fear goes away or the situation changes immediately, but it helps us to remember the God that we put our faith in is so much bigger than the fears that are surrounding us or the situations that are surrounding us. And so I think we can do that in personal examples that are age appropriate. I think we can do that in showing biblical examples like this one with Peter and Jesus. And even just the tangible examples of, hey, let's stop and pray to God right now. I know you're scared. I know you're afraid of something, but our God is bigger, and I'm going to sit with you. And actually, if you're working with a kid or talking with a kid, let them pray. Let them lead in that conversation and in that prayer, so that when they are without you, because you're just there on Sunday. So when they're in moments of fear that they are without you, they have already done some of that side by side work with you to say, I knew I could pray with Mr. Isaac, and we could pray together, and God was with me, and I could remember who God is. And they will retain and remember that when they are on their own and having those same thoughts and fears that they can go to God with.
Kayla, I love that practical application bit, because I feel like so many times we teach these kids some really big concepts because we are following a big God. So sometimes it's kind of hard for them to grasp all of it, but having that practical element really helps anchor them into how we can follow God on a daily basis, how we can give our fears to him, and how he truly takes care and loves us. There's something you said while you're going through all of that about how we can talk about our identity in God. And that really hits on the root of Hi-Fi, that we aren't just teaching these kids and preschoolers like facts about who God is. We're not just teaching them how to live out and be a good person, but we are actually making this connection that their identity, who they are, is based in who God is and his plan for them. And that's so exciting. So that when they are feeling afraid, they can know that, hey, they are following a really big God who really takes care of them. Now, we've talked a lot about the kid and preschool side of this today. We've talked about some of the fears we had as kids, some of the things that kids and preschoolers are feeling. But we know that once you hit like 16, 18, fears don't suddenly and magically just go away. And that even us as adults, we have to deal with the fears in our own lives. So, what would you say to a leader, to someone who is serving maybe under you or serving alongside you, who is struggling with fear right now? What would you say to them?
Um, I think for me, I think fear sometimes manifests itself in adults differently. Where, where a kid is very clear to say, like, I'm scared of this. An adult will say, well, I feel anxious about this. And
Hmm.
so I think the first thing would be to ask ourselves, like, what do you feel anxious about? Because that will probably shed some light on the truth around what we're really afraid of or what we're really scared of. I think asking good questions is always helpful. One of the things that I try to practice in my own life is, as I think about the thing that I'm anxious about or the thing that I'm afraid of, because I am the personality type that is afraid of all the things. So I feel like I deal with this on a regular basis. But asking myself, what am I believing to be true? Not what is true, but what is it I'm believing to be true? Am I believing I am not capable? Am I believing God is not big enough or he can't handle this? Am I believing that I am alone in this situation? And often naming what that fear or anxiety is a clear indicator of what's going on in my heart, but also what I'm actually believing and how that's different than what I say that I believe to be true. What I say I believe is that God's in control, that God can handle this, that he is with me, that he loves me. And so I think identifying the lie that I am believing that feeds that fear and then counteracting that with the truth of who God is a really helpful tool for me as I lead through fears and anxieties.
That's a great point. I think finding the root of what is causing that and what you're believing is extremely helpful when you're feeling fear and anxiety. And I'd also say, because I'm with you, Kayla, I often have worries and anxieties and fears. And I also have to remind myself that God cares about them. Because sometimes I get so wrapped up in worry and anxiousness that I think I'm alone or that it's too small or God wouldn't care about this situation. But I have to remind myself, take it to him, give it to him, trust him in it because he wants to hear from me and he wants me to tell him, how I'm feeling. Um, and sometimes I just want to bottle it all inside and I forget you have a father that you can take this fear to and you can give it to him.
Those are both such good reminders because sometimes it feels, I love what both of you said of, hey, we need to name our fear. We need to say, hey, this is a fear, this is what I'm dealing with, and this is how I believe that I can deal with it. But in true fact, we can take it to God and he can deal with it. And with the story of Peter walking on water, it wasn't until he reached out. He couldn't save himself from his fears. He needed Jesus in that moment. And we get to share with kids and preschoolers that good news that we all need Jesus every second of every day. And I can't wait for them to hear that this week. Well, as we finish up this month, we have one more week next week. It is a week 5. It is Hooray Day and Game Changer. And we are so excited for this week of Hi-Fi. If this is your first time ever doing Game Changer and Hooray Day, be sure to tune in next week as we walk through it. But another fun thing that is happening next week, we have Etch Conference right here in Nashville. And we hope that we get to see you. We hope that we get to meet you, maybe give you a high five. Here's some fun stories about Hi-Fi because that's why we do this. That's what we love to hear is the stories of life change. It's great that we get to have fun, But the most important thing is that God is working through Hi-Fi and through your churches. And we can't wait to hear from you and just talk to you and get to know you. So Etch is next week, and stop by and say hi. But until next week, we will talk to you later.